And we are here to talk about all the crazy stuff that is going on with this $7.25 billion Roundup class action settlement, right? You've been watching this and following all the stuff happening on that.
Yeah, the crazy, crazy settlement and news that kinda never stops.
Yeah, so I've been following in the docket. You got to keep track, right? Because this was initially filed in the city of St. Louis Circuit Court there, Missouri, and now it's been moved to federal court. Can you kind of walk people through, sort of, first of all, what this settlement is, and then what is going on with this battle between lawyers over where the settlement should be, and if it even should be a settlement?
Yeah, so earlier this year, Bayer, Monsanto filed this, settlement in a Missouri state court, and, they proposed $7.25 billion in order to resolve, there are something like over 60,000 remaining, Roundup cancer lawsuits that are pending, and this settlement is meant to resolve those claims. And there's been a lot of controversy since that was filed. There's a lot of people that are very unhappy about the terms of this settlement and what that's going to mean for all the people with cases pending right now, and even for people um, who potentially might develop cancer in the future but haven't yet. There's a lot of there's a lot of issues with the settlement. So, and we can talk about some of those later if you want, but, just to
Well,
kinda get oh,
and today, I guess we should say June 4 is a really important deadline, right?
yes.
For these people.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So, um, one of the things that has been really criticized about this settlement is the fact that it proposes this futures class where that is going to basically include people who develop, non-Hodgkin lymphoma at some point in the future. If they have been exposed to Roundup, they are included in this class settlement, even if they don't know what's going on, even if they've never heard of this, and they could get cancer, next year or years down the road. It could potentially cover even people who haven't been born yet. There's just so many questions about who is covered in this futures class. And one of the big issues with the settlement is they have this opt out deadline, which is today. And so, if you don't want to be grouped into this settlement, you have to have gone through this formal opt out process by the deadline, which I believe is midnight tonight. Otherwise, you're automatically included in this. So, if you are someone who, gets cancer down the road and you didn't opt out of the settlement, you're going to be required to go through and, you know, be a part of this settlement that you never even knew about. So it's kind of crazy. Um, and a lot of people are saying that it's unconstitutional. And, how can you include people that have no notice of this and they have no idea what's going on? So, yeah, today is a big day because it's this formal opt out date. And, we're kind of waiting to see um, how many people are opting out of this settlement because Bayer sort of reserved the right to
Right.
toss this whole thing, in the trash if too many people opt out. So today is it's kind of a big day in terms of finding out, you know,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
many people are actually opting out of this settlement and is it still going to go forward?
Right. And I guess we should say, for people, if anybody's watching this who doesn't really know what the Roundup litigation is, this all started 10 years ago when the International Agency for Research on Cancer found glyphosate, this, widely used weed killer, could cause non-Hodgkin lymphoma, is probably a human carcinogen with an association to non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So then you had this like explosion of lawsuits from people all over the United States. I think they got close to 200,000 lawsuits, claims against Bayer, the owner of Monsanto, from all these people suffering from this type of cancer. So this is Bayer's big push. They already had an $11 billion basic settlement fund to take care of people, and they've already paid out a lot of money in jury verdicts. But this is their attempt to really put an end to this litigation.
Yeah.
One of their tactics to put an end to this litigation. So it's a really, as you said, a really big deal, really important. day.
Mhm.
Do you want to talk about the weirdness around the way it was filed and the way it was seems? I mean, there are people, asserting that this has been rushed through, and there was this kind of private meeting with the judge in St. Louis to give it preliminary approval and shove aside any critics.
Yeah, so um, that is part of the craziness of all of this, and it's been criticized by. So there's a federal judge in California who's been overseeing a lot of the national litigation. There is a federal MDL there where a lot of the cases are consolidated. And when he heard about the settlement, he called it filthy. He called it, extremely problematic. He had a lot of really kind of harsh criticism over the settlement and how the whole settlement came about. And now we have these objecting plaintiffs or defendants, if you want to call them that. We'll talk about what's going on there. Um, so there are some attorneys who are representing plaintiffs who are saying that they don't want to be included in this class settlement and that they are objecting to the settlement as a whole because it was rushed through in these secret private meetings in this state court in Missouri. They are saying that, it was kind of done off the record. There's no transcripts from the hearing. Nobody knows what really happened in there. And there's all these plaintiffs' attorneys that have, some of them have hundreds, thousands of these cases filed in their firms, and they had no idea. Like, they didn't know anything about this settlement. This was brought by basically Bayer and a handful of these, class plaintiff attorneys, and they are attempting to push through this settlement that is going to affect all of these people that have cases pending. So it's received a lot of criticism from the judges and also the plaintiffs' attorneys with these cases that are involved in the litigation.
Right. And I guess we should point out a big part of the criticism is the money. So, as you said, there's this group of law firms who have sort of joined hands with Bear to push forward the settlement, and they get like $625 million. I think is what has been
I think
set up.
it's 675 million that they're
675
asking.
to
Yeah.
go to these lawyers that are agreeing to the deal, and the plaintiffs in the settlement. I mean, people might be like, "Oh, I'd love to be part of a settlement. I'll take some money from Bear." But if you look at the numbers, I mean, it could be as little as I think one of the tiers is $6,000. That's for a quick
Right.
action, but and you might or the top tier is like 165,000. It's not a lot of money for somebody who's been, suffering from cancer, it looks like.
Right. And that's a big criticism with the way that the settlement is structured. And a lot of the plaintiffs' attorneys that are not happy about the settlement are saying that, one of the big problems is it treats residential Roundup users very differently than it does someone who is like a farmer. And that, those people are not going to be getting as much money if they decide to opt in the settlement as, the agricultural workers or farmers would be getting. And so there's a big discussion there over whether or not that's fair. And as we know, a lot of these cases that have gone to jury trial, even these residential users, they stand to be awarded a lot more money than what they stand to receive if they decide to opt into this settlement. So there's a lot of issues with, the amounts. There's also some age differences, for people who get diagnosed at later ages. There's a drastically lower numbers that they're going to be awarded versus somebody who's maybe a little bit younger. So people have problems with that. But certainly the idea of these class lawyers getting $675 million when somebody who has been diagnosed with cancer is going to get $6,000, it definitely seems like there's a fairness issue there.
Yeah. And the other criticisms I've heard include the fact that the company would still be selling the products and would not have any restrictions and would not have to have a warning label. And which, I'm told, I don't know if it's true, but is not really typical in these types of settlements over product harms. That generally there would be some type of change or restriction on the future sales of the product.
Right, and that's another issue. There's no restriction. Aren't required to put any type of warning label on the product. They don't have to really admit any wrongdoing here, and so there's a lot of people that have a big problem with that.
Yeah. So I just think it's so fascinating because I'm kind of a nerd on these legal issues and scouring the dockets to see. So this lawyer, Ashley Keller, who argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, which is a whole other thing we should talk about, I guess, Bear is also trying to get a favorable ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court to help put an end to the litigation. And he argued against the company in April at the U.S. Supreme Court. But now he's kind of come riding in on this class action settlement situation and filed a really novel argument and removed it from the city of St. Louis to the Eastern District of Missouri to federal court with
Mhm.
the goal of getting it back to this California judge who is already called it a filthy deal. Do you want to talk about that maneuvering? And I don't know, can we get into his he's essentially establishing that his people suffering cancer that he represents are not plaintiffs in this situation, but defendants in this situation, and so they have the ability to remove this to federal court. Is that too many
Yes.
B's?
It's
To
I can try and break it down and explain it. It's very complicated. And when I first heard that they were doing this, I was like, "Wow, that is a very creative legal argument." Um, so,
will it fly? I mean, that's what we all really care about, I guess, or not.
I don't know. So what's interesting to me about this is normally it's the corporate defendants who want the cases to be in federal court. I used to litigate asbestos cases, and almost always we were trying to keep those cases in state court as the plaintiffs. The defendants were always trying to get the cases removed. They always wanted the cases in federal court. And so here it's kind of the opposite situation where Bayer wants to keep it in this state court where they think they have, a friendly judge there who is going to just kind of sign off on this settlement. And then we have the federal judge who has been very openly critical of the settlement. And so now you have these plaintiff lawyers who are like, no, we don't want this in state court. We want to get this in front of the federal judge who, we think might shut the settlement down or, put some restrictions on it. So basically, yeah, they're arguing that, well, let me explain this. So typically, only the defendant is able to remove the case to a federal court because the argument is, well, you're the plaintiff and you decided what court you wanted to file this case in. So you can't file your case in a state court and then change your mind and say, actually, no, I want to remove it and take it to federal court. But if a plaintiff files the case in federal court and then the defendant wants to remove it and they, meet all the requirements for removal, they have the option to do that. And so the objecting plaintiffs here are arguing that Bayer and the class attorneys who filed this settlement, they're saying that they worked together on this. They basically put this whole deal together, they pushed it through in this state court, and that they're in cahoots and that they're in total agreement and that they all want this to go through. And so they're technically the plaintiffs, and these objecting plaintiffs that don't want the deal are now the defendants because they're saying we're in opposition and Bayer and these other people, they're on the same side. So we are now the defendants and we should be able to remove this class settlement out to federal court. if that
Crazy.
if anybody's following that. It's
It's
a
crazy. All the
crazy argument.
all the lawyers I've talked to, about this have just said, they've never seen this type of argument, and, They're keeping a close eye to see if he's gonna it's gonna fly, and the company has reacted with outrage, right, and called this like a scam and, like, this is just ridiculous, and they've asked that it be remanded back to the city of St. Louis, but so far, at least as of last night when I checked, the Eastern District is still hanging on to it,
Yeah.
and so we don't really know yet what's gonna
Yeah.
happen, I guess, right?
Right. We don't know what's going to happen there. And, I don't know. It is, like I said, it's a very creative argument. I don't know if it's going to get them where they want to get to, but if anything, in the meantime, maybe it's buying some time um, to see what's going to happen with the Supreme Court case. I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, should we talk about a little bit the Supreme Court case and what we're waiting for there? We're not expected to get a decision till the end of June, I think, on that.
Yeah, end of June or beginning of July is kind of the predictions on the decision there, but yeah, so in the midst of all this crazy drama that's going on with the settlement, there is also this major Supreme Court decision that we have all been waiting on where basically the Supreme Court is making a determination on um, whether people can file failure to warn lawsuits in the state courts against pesticide companies if the EPA has basically signed off and approved on their warning label or their lack of warning label.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and so that is a case that obviously has major implications for all of these cases that are pending, for people that might have cases in the future. And this whole settlement is it's kind of unfair to the people that are having to make this decision on, do I want to opt into this settlement, do I want to opt out of this settlement, because we're waiting on, we don't know what the Supreme Court is going to say, we don't know what they're going to do, and so it's really it's forcing people to make a decision before we know this massive final piece of these cases. So
Yeah.
um
But even for people, my understanding is that it was very much by design, probably, or appears to be that way by Monsanto or Bayer's design that plaintiffs, people with cancer, have to decide before the U.S. Supreme ruling comes down. If the U.S. Supreme Court comes down and says, no, people can continue to file failure to warn, no, Monsanto, you don't have that defense,
Mhm.
people would be less likely to want to agree to the settlement, right? But if
Right.
the Supreme Court says, no, we're taking that away, you can't sue the company for failure to warn, then they might really want to be in the settlement. But as you pointed out, they're supposed to make this decision before the Supreme Court ruling comes down. My understanding is, though, that Monsanto or Bayer can pull out of the settlement
Mhm.
after the Supreme Court ruling comes down if they want to.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, which again is seems very unfair to the plaintiffs that, they kind of have this ability to they can wait and decide on what the Supreme Court is going to say, but the plaintiffs have this opt-out deadline of today. So, um yeah,
Yeah,
that's a major piece of this that again, we just kind of don't know and everybody's sitting around waiting on the Supreme Court
right,
to rule there.
right. Well, it's all very interesting to watch from the sidelines and a lot of savvy legal maneuvering going on both sides, it seems like. So, but, tens of thousands of people with cancer at stake, waiting to see what shakes out. So I really appreciate you coming on to talk about it and explain it
Yeah.
all.
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks. I hope that explains some things. It's like I said, it's very complicated and there's so much, all these crazy legal arguments and stuff that I've never even seen. I'm like, what are they trying to argue? This is crazy. But um yeah, I hope that maybe that
yeah,
explains some things as best as we can do that for people. So,
yes, much better job than I've been doing trying to explain it. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll talk
you're
again.
welcome.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye.
Bye.